Days of brutal travel, countless hours spent battling aberrant monstrosities and experiments. All of it led to this moment. Godfrey, the human rogue, held his twin daggers with a tight grip. Rhaenyra, the elven druid, summoned forth plant life to guard her allies. Gwynlyn, the dwarven paladin, prayed to Lathander with all her soul for victory. And the group's leader, a human cleric named Jace, prayed to Talos as waves of storm magic coursed from his body. All of their hearts sunk to their stomachs as they took in the scene before them. Groups, no, armies of foul beasts stood before them. Grix, massive worm-like monsters with sharp beaks for mouths. Mind flayers, mucus-covered humanoid things with squid-like heads and an alien intelligence, all controlled by one horrible being, the source of the party's psychic torment, the one responsible for controlling the Nautiloid ship, the Elder Brine. Floating within its translucent tank, the sickening brine surrounding it brimming with hundreds of tadpoles. It whispered cosmic inevitability into the minds of the heroes, and the heroes spat in the face of their fate. And so the battle began. A brutal affair. Gwynlyn was the first to fall victim to the Mind Flayer's psychic assaults, cutting off her arm to break out of her trance just before her demise. Godfrey danced across the battlefield in a blur of motion as he dispatched the Grix, aided by cover made from Rhaenyra's magical plants. Jace summoned all of the might of Talos as storm clouds buffeted the battlefield, sustaining heavy wounds before finishing off the last Mind Flayer with Gwynlyn's help. However, the final hurdle was not easily overcome. The Elder Brain pulsed with psionic energy, vowing to break the minds of the heroes if it was the last thing it did. Torrents of blood and thought made into solidified power showered the battlefield, and in the aftermath the Elder Brain lied dead on the ground, its tank broken and its body mangled, but it died satisfied. The heroes emerged victorious, but not without a cost. Jace held the body of Gwynlyn in his arms as he wept. His magic wasn't able to stop the bleeding. Elsewhere, Godfrey had a new goal in mind. His brush with death had made him realize that if he never said it now, he'd regret it forever. He would tell Rhaenyra he loved her, not caring about the difference in their lifespans any longer. He asked Rhaenyra to wait for a second while he got something, and sensing the passion in his voice, she waited eagerly. Godfrey navigated his way through the wreckage, puzzled. The ship should have gone dead. The Elder Brain was the only one capable of piloting it. He retched as he stepped over the spilled brine fluid that was once within the Elder Brain's tank, spotting a shiny jewel among the wreckage, a perfect stone for the ring he made for her. As he picked up the stone, he noted something odd. The brine had disappeared from the ground. Elsewhere, Rhaenyra hummed happily to herself as she waited for Godfrey. Her ears perked up as she heard his voice around the corner.
I love you.
Elsewhere, as he laid Gwynlyn to rest, Jace heard Rhaenyra scream, a scream thick with sorrow and horror. He sprinted around the corner. His breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. This was certainly Godfrey's voice saying he loved Rhaenyra, but it was mixed with hundreds of other voices. Towering over Rhaenyra was a mass of brine fluid once within the Elder Brain's tank, somehow given life as scores of tadpoles writhed chaotically within. And tragically floating within was the body of Godfrey, his face slack-jawed and drooling, all thought seeming to have left his body as he lifelessly fell to the floor out of the brine fluid. His mouth moved, repeating the same 3 words, but his voice no longer belonged to him. The mass of brine lurched towards Rhaenyra and Jace as a maelstrom of thoughts entered their minds, and they felt their own thoughts begin to dim. Hello, and hello. I'm S.O.C.K, aka The Ghost of Yugoslavia Part 64, the sequel, and I'm here for the 8th installment of Dude Brew. This one's a special episode of Dude Brew for 2 main reasons. One, this video is going to be part of a special event called Ooze Week, which is a big event going on inside of the Discord server I'm in called the Cosmic Tap. Check the description below if you want to talk to me and other creators and stuff. But for Ooze Week, myself and a whole bunch of other creators are going to be taking a crack at oozes. I'm talking stat blocks, lore videos, reworks, all that oozy goodness. This is also the only video I ever get to say oozy goodness and not get flagged by the authorities, so I'm going to take advantage of it. The second reason that this episode of Dude Brew is special is because we officially hit 100 subscribers on the channel a couple days ago. I want to take a second to genuinely thank every person who's liked and subscribed so far, and also commented on the videos and everything. It really does mean a lot to me, and I wanted to make a point to say it. I try to put out cool stuff, so I hope I'm making a positive impact on the airwaves. But speaking of positive impact, let's talk about some impact from that oozy goodness. As you can tell by the title and that lovely little encounter intro, today for Ooze Week I'll be showing off a homebrew creature I made called the Brine Ooze. Before I get into the lore and stat block for this bathwater of doom, I want to embrace the spirit of Ooze Week and go over what actually makes oozes scary. What's the core behind the oozy goodness? I'm really interested to see how many times I can say oozy goodness before everyone just stops watching the video. This just ends up having all dislikes and 30 seconds of watch time. But that's besides the point. There's going to be timestamps in the video if you want to skip to the stat block, story hooks, all that jazz. And without further ado, let's go over oozes as a concept. So I haven't made it a secret at all. I love the horror genre, and it's my favorite genre to use in D&D. And the first question that comes up when talking about a monster in horror is what makes it scary? Why do dungeon masters and players love oozes so much? What specifically makes oozes a terrifying monster? I think it comes down to three things. The first reason oozes are so unique and scary is actually one of the reasons I had never really liked them at first. And I want to stress at first, I did some research into oozes for a previous video and then leading up to Ooze Week. So I've seen the light, I've seen the oozy goodness, and what fascinates me is the mindless nature of oozes. Creatures like aberrations or even insects are often described as mindless, but most of the time they just operate on a logic that humans or mortal species don't understand. In ooze, well, most of them are usually mindless creatures, like truly mindless. Oozes are the antithesis of desire. You look around at the majority of monsters and they all want something. A red dragon wants gold. A vampire wants blood. A demon wants your soul. A fae wants you to have an acid trip. Well, maybe not all the time with the last one, but an ooze doesn't want. It just is. It's going to dissolve you or melt you or absorb you, maybe all three, and it's going to do it just like it does to everything else. You can't bargain with it. You can't scare it. You can't even really trick it. Oozes are just these forces of nature that churn along without any thought or emotion. And that leads to the second scary thing about oozes, at least to me. Oozes don't even feel the same to fight against. Like the way a DM describes fighting an ooze is less like a fight and more like surviving the ooze itself. Let's say you stab a goblin with a sword. It screams in agony and the DM describes it bleeding all over the place. But an ooze doesn't have organs, it doesn't have weak points, it doesn't have bones to break. You swing your sword and it just sinks into it. You burn it with fire and it just bubbles and steams with this horrifying sort of stench. There's no satisfying sound of victory when you're fighting an ooze. You just hit it until it stops, and the lack of any relatable sensation from the ooze itself makes them really feel alien and relentless. And the third and arguably most iconic scary thing about oozes is also the way that they kill you. So not every ooze is acid, but getting killed by most of them is like that scene from the Blob movie where you see the woman slowly getting dissolved down to her skeleton. Picture what it's like inside of the ooze. Your skin is turning soft like jelly. Indescribable pain is all over your body. You're suffocating and thrashing, but there's nowhere to hold on to. There's nowhere to run to as you watch your body slowly being broken down to your base parts, your nutrients. Oozes literally unmake their victims. Another thing I think is cool about oozes is that because they're simple creatures, they have that same Pokemon type vibe where you can slap a trait onto an ooze to make so many different kinds. You've got black puddings that dissolve armor. You've got gray oozes that disguise as walls. You've got your fire ooze, blood ooze. There's even an ooze made of beer if I'm not mistaken. They're a lot more versatile than I had previously thought, so I gotta give them credit for that. So now that we've gone over oozes as a monster type, I'm excited to show y'all what I'm gonna be stepping up to bat with for Ooze Week. And let's answer the first question of what is a brine ooze? So getting into what a brine ooze actually is, brine oozes are created from the brackish fluid that fills the tanks elder brains rest in. The fluid is a mixture of water, cerebrospinal waste, dissolved gray matter, and a mass of tadpoles that swim around in floating pieces of mind flare brains. Over centuries, this brew thickens with latent psionic energy from the elder brain. On rare occasions, either by accident or design, it coalesces into a brine ooze. Contrary to what observers see, brine oozes have no mind of their own. They are intent without thought. Any semblance of sentience is merely the mass of absorbed thoughts and memories that guide its actions, or at least quote-unquote actions. Brine oozes passively absorb the psychic residue of everything they pass over. They quote-unquote taste, thoughts, memories, and emotional sensations in the minds of nearby creatures. Prolonged exposure to a brine ooze can cause hallucinations, memory loss, or even temporary insanity. When they engulf a creature, they cause little to no physical damage to the creature most of the time. Instead, they absorb fragments of their identity and thoughts, which are relayed back to their elder brain. Victims often walk away from encounters physically intact, but they're merely shadows of what they used to be. A peculiar occurrence among living victims of brine ooze attacks is their tendency to seek out contact with the brine ooze again. Researchers theorize this might be an effort to regain their memories, or maybe a macabre link to the entity that sundered their mind. Brine oozes aren't normally independent beings. Each maintains a psychic tether to its creator, functioning as a scout and sentry for the elder brain. Through the use of these psionic tethers, elder brains can survey their layers in real time. Some elder brains even prefer to see the world through their oozes, experiencing reality through a haze of fluid perception. Elder brains also frequently utilize the long-distance capabilities of their brine oozes, able to control them up to a mile away. Brine oozes are often frequently sent along with squadrons of mind flayers to act as living data for it to absorb later. On rare occasions when the tethered elder brain is slain or loses control, a brine ooze can become rogue. Without guidance, its stolen fragments of sentience begin to coalesce into a warped alien identity. These rogue oozes crawl along the Underdark or occupy ancient ruins, whispering stolen memories in hundreds of voices. Rogue brine oozes are rigorously hunted by mind flayers, fearing the absorbed thoughts from the elder brain might turn the brine ooze into an immense threat. Some lesser Underdark creatures or deranged cultists mistake the rogue brine oozes for divine beings or prophets. These groups sometimes keep them in subterranean shrines, interpreting the ooze's chaotic emissions as sacred language. So to summarize, brine oozes are basically the world's deadliest soup. It's a soup that bites back, but in all seriousness, brine oozes come to life. They animate from the latent psionic energy that elder brains are constantly pushing out and everything. So because of that, they have this symbiotic sort of relationship with psychic beings, or just their elder brain in general. That is usually the situation. It's absorbing the passive energies from the elder brain and relaying the information that it's absorbing back to them. But like I said, these things are mindless. They steal identity, they steal thoughts. So any sort of actions that it's taking is merely just the whims of whatever sort of warped identity is formed from the mass of different identities that are all congealed together. Like, I want to really stress that this creature is not alive or not thinking about anything. It's just acting on thoughts that are not its own. So that's really what makes it such a terrifying creature and everything, and what makes elder brains use them as such effective sentries and stuff like that. Like, you have the relentless sort of mindlessness of an ooze that can just keep fighting. It's a perfect soldier and everything, but it also is absorbing thoughts and sending them back to the elder brain. And even if it's not, it's a rogue brine ooze and stuff like that, it's still doing the exact same thing. It's just not doing it with a specific objective and everything to a master to serve, quote unquote, and stuff. But brine oozes are these sort of psychic beings that are formed from other psychic thoughts, if that makes sense. Like, it's like a trash compactor of thoughts and emotions and all that sort of stuff. But without getting into all that, this kind of delves into the story and plot hook side of it. We're going to go ahead and go over the stat block of the Brine Ooze. So just like before, I'm going to be putting in the actual 5e formatted, or at least 2014 5e formatted stat blocks above the actual thing I have in the Google Doc right here. But going over the Brine Ooze is a huge ooze, unaligned obviously. It has an AC of 7, it has 126 hit points with a roll of 12d12 plus 48. And for its speed, it has 30 feet, not really walking speed, but 30 feet crawling speed, and then has a fly speed of 15 feet, which is a hover. So it's the same thing as a mind flayer. It's able to float, along the ground, 1 foot off the ground and everything. For its attributes, it has 16 strength, 4 dexterity, 18 constitution, 6 intelligence, 9 wisdom, and 18 charisma. And I really want to stress that the intelligence here, it would be a 1 if it wasn't for the fact that it's just this massive thoughts and everything. So it technically is quote unquote thinking, but all it's thinking is just it's moving through the different thoughts that it has absorbed and stuff like that. But it's not having any original thoughts, basically, is what I'm trying to say. For its saving throws, it has proficiency in Constitution, Intelligence, and Charisma saving throws. So it has a +8 to Constitution saving throws, it has a +2 to Intelligence saving throws, and it has a +8 to Charisma saving throws, as these things are literally made of pure intention and will that's stolen from other beings. So that's why I had to explain the high Charisma and stuff. For its skills, it only has proficiency in perception with a +3, but for its resistances, it has resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. That's not bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical attacks. No, that's just bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, which is what I'm going to be doing for all oozes that I run and stuff. That it's literally a mass of jelly, essentially. So yeah, it's resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, even if it's like a magical weapon and stuff. I think that makes them a lot more threatening, and which is what I kind of wanted to get across for this sort of creature. For its damage immunities, it has immunity to acid damage, poison damage, and psychic damage. For its condition immunities, it has immunity to all the same conditions that oozes usually have immunity to: blinded, charmed, deafened, exhaustion, frightened, grappled, poisoned, prone, restrained, just a whole laundry list of basically every condition that you can inflict on this thing. Which I do, that's one of the things that I do like about oozes for like the design and stuff. They feel kind of relentless with that way. For its senses, though, it has blind sight of 60 feet and it's blind beyond this radius. You're going to see why that doesn't matter in a second, but it has a passive perception of 13. It also understands deep speech but doesn't speak it, but it has a telepathy of 120 feet. For its first trait, it has the signature trait that all oozes have, amorphous, so the Brine Ooze can move through a space as narrow as 1 inch wide without squeezing. Its second trait, which is one of the things that kind of takes up the most space among the stat block, it is a little bit of a beefy one, but this isn't the type of creature that I think you just kind of throw out there for a random encounter table, because it is pretty brutal. But getting into its engulf trait, the Brine Ooze takes up its entire space. Other creatures can enter the space, but a creature that does so is subjected to the ooze's engulf and has disadvantage on the saving throw. Creatures inside the Brine Ooze can be seen but have total cover. A creature within 5 feet of the ooze can take an action to pull a creature or object out of the ooze. Doing so requires a successful DC 13 athletics check, and the creature making the attempt takes 3d6 psychic damage. The Brine Ooze can hold 1 large creature or up to 4 medium or smaller creatures inside it at a time. This is just the same thing as the gelatinous cube sort of engulf trait. Its next trait is called Stench. Any creature that enters or starts its turn within 5 feet of the Brine Ooze must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned until the end of its next turn. On a successful saving throw, the creature is immune to the Brine Ooze's stench for 24 hours. I think it's very safe to say that this thing would smell horrible. Like, it would smell worse than a rotting corpse. Like, it's the brine fluid that elderbrains sit inside of. So yeah, it's gonna have one of the worst smells that you've probably ever smelled in your entire life. But obviously, yeah, if you succeed, then you kind of steel your stomach against it and stuff. Next up, for its next trait, is called Psychic Hunger. If the Brine Ooze takes psychic damage, it heals HP equal to the psychic damage dealt. So this has a lot of really cool synergy. This is going to come up when I talk about how you can use this creature in your game mechanically, but this makes it synergize with a lot of psychic creatures and makes it a really good minion, or I guess like co-boss. Is that the right term? Not like a minion, but like a boss that's on the same level. Just a partner, you know what I mean? It's a really good fit for psychic bosses and everything, as they can still do their attacks if it's an area of effect, but they're also healing the Brine Ooze and stuff. So I think that adds a lot of cool synergy, especially with the fact that it eats psionic energy and thoughts and stuff. So I thought it made sense. But next up, speaking of psionic energy, is called Maddening Whispers for its next trait. Any creature that ends its turn within 15 feet of the Brine Ooze must succeed on a DC 13 intelligence saving throw or be frightened until the end of its next turn. On a successful saving throw, the creature is immune to this effect for 24 hours. So yeah, no, it's a mass of hundreds of voices and thoughts and memories that you hear in your head. Like, I imagine you run up to it and everything. You get this flash in your head if you fail the saving throw of, like, let's just say the Brine Ooze absorbed the memories of a kid that used to play on the playground all the time. You get these visions in your head of like a POV perspective of you swinging on a swing, and then eventually it goes all the way up to the person getting enveloped by this Brine Ooze. That's very terrifying. Speaking of terrifying, we're going to go into its next trait called Psionic Feedback. If the Brine Ooze is within 1 mile of its Elder Brain, it is under the Elder Brain's direct control and acts with perfect coordination. While within this range, the Elder Brain can see and hear through the Ooze's senses, and the Ooze gains advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. The Elder Brain can also cast a spell through the Ooze as if it were the spell's point of origin. So yeah, if you're in a nautiloid ship, for example, and you're getting closer to the Elder Brain when you see one of these patrolling around, but what's going to be terrifying is that the Elder Brain also rolls initiative secretly, so it's like moving on somebody else's turn, and after somebody else's turn is done, you just see this mind blast or whatever sort of thing that it wanted to fire from the Brine Ooze just emanate from the Brine Ooze, and you get to have a little bit of a smug face as a DM when they're like, how does the Brine Ooze have this spell? I'm like, the Brine Ooze doesn't have that spell, and then that just gives the players a hint that something crazy is going on with this link this Brine Ooze and stuff. For the next trait, it's called Eldritch Echo. If dropped to 0 HP, the maelstrom of thoughts and psionic energy explodes outward. All creatures within 20 feet must succeed on a DC 16 intelligence saving throw, take 5d10 psychic damage, and be stunned until the end of their next turn. A successful save halves the damage and negates the stun. This also synergizes with it being a really good minion for any psychic or like illithid sort of thing. There's a lot of different scenarios where this can be really bad. You defeat it, but then everybody might be stunned in the area, and that's when the mind flayers start walking up, rubbing their webbed hands together, getting ready to eat some brains and stuff. But yeah, it adds a lot of tension, which is kind of like I said, the goal of trying to make this creature and everything. For its spell casting, it's called Psionic Maelstrom. So the Brine Ooze's spell casting ability is Charisma. It has a spell save DC of 16 and a +8 to hit with spell attacks. The Brine Ooze can innately cast the following spells, requiring no components. At will, it can cast Detect Thoughts. 3 times per day each, it can cast Hold Person or Tasha's Mind Whip, and then once per day, it can cast Synaptic Static. So it's not a huge spell list, but these are very, very debilitating spells that aid towards the playstyle of this ooze. It does seem like it has a lot of features so far, but all it is just moving towards the person trying to engulf them. So you'll see that in a second. But Hold Person lets them keep them in place. Tasha's Mind Whip takes away reactions and stuff. I think Synaptic Static actually takes away reactions. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know Tasha's Mind Whip is like I think it's an area of effect thing off the top of my head, but I can't remember. Either way, this spell list kind of aids towards that whole thing. It also has an optional feature where you can give it legendary resistances. So you can give it 3 legendary resistances a day if you want this to be a more of a boss creature on its own and everything. Most of the time it's going to be a rogue Brine Ooze and stuff, so it's a little bit more powerful. But getting into its actions, it has multi-attack. So the Brine Ooze can make 2 pseudopod attacks as a main action. But for its pseudopod attack, it's a melee weapon attack, +7 to hit. It has a reach of 5 feet. It hits all targets within range. I want to stress all targets within range. So let's say they're flanking this Brine Ooze, which is the usual procedure. They're going to try to jump this thing. It shoots out these tendrils towards everybody within range, which I think makes sense for the formless nature of an ooze. So yeah, it hits all targets within range, and on a hit, the target takes 2d8 +4 bludgeoning damage, plus 2d8 psychic damage. And once per turn on a hit, the target has to succeed on a DC 13 charisma saving throw, or their charisma score is reduced by 1d4. The target becomes incapacitated if it reduces that score to 0. A creature reduced to 0 charisma is incapacitated until the effect is restored by a lesser restoration, greater restoration, or similar magic. So this is very nasty, as charisma is oftentimes, unless you're a sorcerer or a bard or like a paladin, oftentimes it's usually the dump stat, especially for like a lot of your martials and everything, or maybe the wizard who just focuses on intelligence and stuff. So this is attacking your literal force of will. This is more than just stealing psychic sort of things, like taking intelligence drain, which I kind of considered, but no, it's taking your very being, everything that makes your personality and stuff like that. It's taking your experiences, your connections with people and stuff. So charisma kind of represents it draining you of that force of like will of your mind and stuff. But the beefiest sort of feature on the stat block is one of the actions it has. It's called Engulf. So I kind of based this off of the Gelatinous Cube and also another creature called the Elderbrain Dragon. But for Engulf, the Brine Ooze moves up to its speed. While doing so, it can enter the space of a huge or smaller creature. Whenever the ooze enters a creature's space, the creature must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity saving throw. On a successful save, the creature can choose to be pushed 5 feet back or to the side of the ooze. A creature that chooses not to be pushed suffers the consequences of a failed saving throw. On a failed save, the ooze enters the creature's space, and the creature takes 10 psychic damage and is engulfed. The engulfed creature is restrained, blinded, and unable to breathe. While engulfed, the creature takes 10 psychic damage at the start of each of the ooze's turns as illithid tadpoles and psionic energy assault its mind. An engulfed creature can attempt to escape by taking an action to make a DC 15 athletics check. On a success, the creature escapes and enters a space of its choice within 5 feet of the ooze. But it's not done yet. It's very bad if you get engulfed. If you fail the saving throw, you are also infested. So for infestation, a creature that is engulfed becomes infested with illithid tadpoles. While infested, the creature takes 2d10 psychic damage at the start of each of its turns. At the end of each of its turns, the creature can make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, ending the effect on itself after succeeding on 3 of these saves. If the creature is targeted by a greater restoration spell, magic that ends a curse, or restores 40 hit points or more, the infestation ends immediately. And you're going to see why you want to do that as quickly as possible if you get infested. If a humanoid is reduced to 0 hit points while infested, he becomes stable but remains unconscious for 6d12 hours. When the period of unconsciousness ends, the creature transforms into a mind flayer with all its hit points. Casting a wish or greater restoration spell on the unconscious creature rids it of the infestation and prevents it from turning into a mind flayer. So you're going to want to cast something on this person really quickly, but this is really brutal if you're like, let's just say you're like level 7 or below. I don't know when greater restoration and things like that are kind of a thing, but you're going to need some high level magic to do this. And let's just say you're out stranded in the middle of the wilderness. This might be a death sentence for a character and everything, which is why I would probably say that you want to read the stat block. This kind of justifies how long the stat block is because of how brutal this feature is, man. This could be a character ender, and it's a really kind of dark thing for a character to go through. Like, imagine your party members, okay, so we saved the fighter and everything, but he's infested and unconscious, and we don't have a greater restoration or a wish spell, so we have to put him out of his misery. We don't want him to raise as a mind flayer, but let's just say they don't know about this infestation feature. You can describe I would describe the tadpoles going into the person's brain. Honestly, I mean, that just goes into how I would use this creature, so I don't want to spend too much time with it. But you have to foreshadow this sort of thing because of how brutal it is, because that's going to be a very sad thing, just to say the least. I don't want to go into a whole thing about it, but there also is an optional feature here. I put it in the stat block, but you don't have to use them if you don't want to. Like I said, this is the same thing as legendary resistance. It has a couple legendary actions if you want to make this creature like a real boss monster, or like you want to make it hang with higher level creatures or higher level players. I mean, so for its legendary actions, the Brine Ooze can take 2 legendary actions, choosing from the options below, and it regains these legendary actions at the start of its turn as usual for all creatures with them. So for the cost of 1 legendary action, it can use Crawling Chaos. The Brine Ooze moves up to 15 feet without provoking attacks of opportunity. If it ends its movement within 5 feet of a hostile creature, it can make 1 pseudopod attack. Pretty simplistic. Next up, for the cost of 2 legendary actions, is called Oppressive Thoughts. The Brine Ooze targets 1 creature of its choice within 30 feet of it. The target creature must make a DC 15 intelligence saving throw or fall prone for up to 1 minute. The affected creature cannot willingly move away from the ooze while under this effect. The affected creature can spend an action to remake their saving throw. If the target fails the saving throw by 5 or more, it must immediately use this reaction to crawl towards the Brine Ooze as far as it can. This is kind of it's like implanting this psychic lure in your head to like get you closer to it, which aids towards its despite of how big the stat block is, its whole goal is to move as close to you as possible and then engulf you. Everything else plays into that sort of goal and stuff, but its last legendary action is called Thought Dram, which costs 2 legendary actions. The ooze releases a pulse of psionic energy in a 20-foot radius. Each creature of its choice in that area must make a DC 15 intelligence saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 4d8 psychic damage and its memory weakens to the end of its next turn. And this causes you to basically be under the effects of the Bane spell. On a success, it takes half damage and suffers no effect. So I want to address real quick, because I know I was talking to somebody about this when I sent them the stat block, but yes, this is a long stat block, but like I said, this is a very simplistic creature as far as how you're going to be running it. I feel like that kind of delves into how you can use this creature, but this isn't really about a story thing. I'm just talking mechanically. So its whole goal is to get to engulf the person. Everything, like I said, leans towards that. If you, for its stench ability, if you haven't succeeded against that, you fail that saving throw, you're poisoned. That's disadvantage on ability checks. And is it ability checks and attack rolls, or is it also saving throws? But either way, I know it's debilitating as far as trying to get away from it and trying to fight it and stuff. It has that Oppressive Thoughts legendary action, which can let you pull it towards it, but even without those legendary actions, it also has Hold Person, it has Synaptic Static, and on top of that, the Engulf action lets them move further, so potentially move 60 feet towards a person, which is a lot faster than your regular ooze. But I kind of reasoned that because it's this brackish water kind of animated by psionic energy, it doesn't have the same limitations as a lot of other oozes of being really slow, and that would kind of really limit the deadliness of this type of creature. But I feel like I've talked about this creature a whole bunch. I could really go on and on about like the different ways that you could use this creature mechanically, but that does delve into how you can use this creature in your game. So I love illithids, and this creature is literally tailor-made to be the perfect tag-along creature to pretty much any illithid monster. They also present the type of threat that I think oozes are perfect as, just like a boulder from Indiana Jones, where it's just this massive unstoppable thing rolling down the hallway towards you while you run away. Within the lore, they're sent out as sentries to guard and survey Elderbrain temples, or they're sent out to accompany mind flayers on journeys to the outside world. So if you want to foreshadow an illithid plotline, a good encounter depending upon the party's level is take about 2 mind flayers, give them some minion monsters like Grix or Intellect Devourers that assault the players before the main fight with the mind flayers. And then you have the Brine Ooze fight alongside the 2 mind flayers to act as the damage sponge while the mind flayers run around to get better positioning in the fight. I'll probably like make it so there's like a lot of cover in this fight, specifically if you're organizing it with 2 mind flayers and a Brine Ooze, which I think is a pretty good setup. But you could also do multiple Brine Oozes, versus the party and the Elderbrain and stuff. But it's a very versatile creature, and I think one of the biggest ways they synergize with creatures like mind flayers in particular, that the Brine Ooze heals from psychic damage. So mind flayers or even the Elderbrain itself could mind blast the players and simultaneously heal the Brine Ooze as well. I describe to the players when this happens that you see this massive brine that was once drooping low begin to ripple and float higher in the air as this psychic energy causes it to expand. Also, their infestation trait and charisma draining pseudopod attack puts a ticking clock on the players to deal with the issue, and also adds personal stakes to it as well, but that goes into story details. For story ideas, the Brine Ooze represents a bigger threat than what physically happens to you. It feeds on memories and thoughts. What if a rogue Brine Ooze is worshipped by a cult? One of the players has an important NPC that all the players love to interact with, but one day when the players visit them, that NPC is slack-jawed and drooling, still physically alive, but the NPC looks at the players and doesn't recognize them. It can be more subtle than that too. The NPC might be fine, but they're not the same. The things and people it used to love just don't matter to it anymore, and the NPC doesn't know why. So now the players have to seek out the mystery of what happened to the NPC, along the way probably finding various people that also have stolen memories, some of them even in a comatose state as though they don't even have the will to act. Their bodies can't even muster the will to breathe, so that causes a lot more urgency to the players to figure out what's going on. And the existential horror of knowing something is wrong, something's missing, but you don't know what or why, is what makes Brine Oozes terrifying, like just on a primal level. That's not even mentioning the Brine Oozes literally act as a living factory to make more mind flayers by infecting people with tadpoles. I'm just imagining imagine a gut-wrenching plot twist that you've shown all these different comatose people in different towns leading up to this. They're fighting the Brine Ooze, and then one of the players gets infested. You're gonna have one person that puts together, wait, we encountered like 15 people that were also comatose from Brine Ooze attacks that we were going to save, and then that gut-wrenching plot twist, like I said, when they realize all of the infected that they talked to before are now going to be turning into mind flayers, or they might have already turned into mind flayers depending upon how long it's been since the last time they saw them. So they just realize in the middle of this fight that possibly there could be scores of new mind flayers that arise within a defenseless city or like a hospital and everything, and they could also be used as a very strong minion for an Elderbrain as well, even outside of that story thing that I was talking about. And it's also a believable way for the DM to metagame entire armies being sent to the player's location, because the Elderbrain is viewing the party through the Brine Ooze they're fighting in the hallway. It's directly connected to it if it's within a 1 mile radius. So it's one of those creatures that acts as I think it synergizes a lot with the, I guess not military structure, but the strategy that you're going to be employing if you're playing an Elderbrain or Mind Flayer sort of interaction and everything. This thing is directly connected to them, or the Elderbrain specifically, I mean. But either way, I think this is a very effective creature, and on its own or as a really strong minion, I think it holds up on all tiers of play as well, as a really threatening boss at lower levels, and then still really threatening when you get to higher levels and stuff, just because of what it can do. But I won't take up too much time. I know I nerd out about stuff all the time, so I could talk about this for literally probably another 2 hours, but I won't do that to you guys. I hope y'all enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you like my content, and yeah, peace.